Stocks and treasuries rallying after President-elect Donald Trump picks Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary. Bessent saying he'll back tariffs and tax cuts. Meanwhile, in Europe, Unicredit begins an all-share takeover bid for its domestic rival, Banco BPM. The Italian lender also considers an acquisition of Germany's Commerzbank. Plus, of course, sticking with Germany, the economy very much in focus. The IFO Institute releasing its latest business confidence survey. We'll bring you the numbers in just a moment. In the meantime, let's take a quick look at the European markets map. You are seeing some green on the screen here. Some of that is going to be that Trump narrative. Some of that is going to be the Scott Bessent relief rally that you are seeing across the board. Italy is the sole underperformer. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to quickly get to the German IFO data as well. That's going to be market moving right off the bat. The November IFO Business Confidence Index coming at 85.7. The estimate was 86.0. So a drop, a little bit of weakness. This is in stark contrast to what we saw last month, where we did see a little bit of an uptick. When it comes to euro dollar, not a ton of movement off of the back of that. We're still looking at a 104 handle. It feels like the U.S. story is an overhang to the currency. When you look at the Boone story as well, I imagine it'll be a very similar dynamic when it comes to that German story, although perhaps also catching their cue from what's going on, of course, in the U.S. We'll speak to the IFO president later in the show. Clemens Fuest is going to be joining me. He talking a little bit about the state of the economy, the tariff story, not to mention the federal election over in Germany as well. Quick check on the cross-asset story. We just hit the euro dollar. We just hit German boots. Stock 600 overall higher by about 0.2%, despite some of the pain you're seeing in the Italian banking sector. And this is crucial here as we talk about a little bit of a kind of trade around in terms of this Unicredit story. They've got their eye on Commerzbank. They've also got their eye on Banco BPM, but actively not Monte Paschi. All of that being reflected in some of these bank stocks. We're going to dive into the details later in the show, but overarching, it's all about what's going on in the U.S. Futures looking higher over in the States, but to about 0.4%. A bid into U.S. assets down by about 6 basis points on the 10-year yield. And then, of course, Bitcoin right on the cusp of 100,000. A lot to get through. Let's get started.
Newsmakers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Kriti Gupta in London, filling in for Francine Lacqua. Let's get to our top story. Donald Trump has nominated Scott Bessent as his next Treasury Secretary. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Bessent said that delivering on the president-elect's tax pledges is his top policy priority. Let's get a little bit more insight here and bring in our EMEA News Director, Roz Matheson, and Bloomberg's cross-asset reporter, Justina Lee. The power combo that I'm sure can digest what's going on here. Roz, I want to start with you. We're seeing green on the screen in these markets, a very clear reaction. But why?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, he's well known in the market. So this is, in a way, Donald Trump's nod to Wall Street with this appointment, with this nomination. And you can see that reflected in the fact that, he's very much a fiscal conservative. So he's going to keep a close eye on inflation for a start and whether some of these policies might be inflationary. Sure, he's going to have to enact a bulk of Donald Trump's policy. He's already making that clear, at least on the tax front. But maybe he'll move a bit more carefully and a bit more slowly than Donald Trump may have wanted at the outset, particularly when it comes to things like tariffs. We can see that already in China, a sense of perhaps he is the least worst option for them as Treasury Secretary because he might be a bit more cautious on the tariffs front. He'll probably have to do something around tariffs, but maybe not with that level of speed, again, that Donald Trump was looking for. So a sense in the market of like, OK, there's an adult coming into the table at least, fiscal conservative, will enact on tax policy, perhaps a bit slower and a bit more cautious on the spending side at least, and definitely perhaps slower on tariffs.
Well, Justina, weigh in here. Ross is kind of talking about this dynamic of there being a relief rally. It's a risk rally, but it's also a little bit of a relief rally as well. But then you look at this bond market and you see a bid into the Treasury curve and then yet a rally in risk assets. How do you compute the two?
Yeah, I think part of the story is that kind of with Treasury yields where they are right now, there is just kind of a lot of demand. People are looking at bonds and thinking that they're pretty attractive. And at the same time, there's a relief right now because he's sort of seen as kind of being a bit more worried about inflation and about fiscal deficit. And I think it's kind of interesting because we've kind of seen the bonds and stock relationship kind of go different ways. And more recently, actually, bonds kind of have been kind of hedging stocks more. But kind of where is that going? And of course, inflation is going to be another big question here.
Well, there's this concept of the fact that he's talking about tariffs offsetting tax cuts, and somehow that makes the deficit net. I imagine he's got the numbers to back it up. We're looking at a 30-year as well, down about 7 basis points this morning. So you're already seeing a bid. How much of the market is actually paying attention to the deficit story as opposed to maybe this kind of America first story? What takes precedence?
Yeah, it's been kind of really interesting because I think for anyone working through the Trump trades, you've always had to kind of parse these contradictions. And I think we've seen kind of markets all along maybe downplay the severity of the tariffs here. And the Scott Bessent pick is sort of confirming that. But we'll have to see how it plays out because one of the reasons why he was picked is that he's always been able to demonstrate his loyalty. And at this point, we've seen kind of Trump really kind of aim at a pretty purist implementation of his vision here. He feels like the American people have really given him that mandate. So at the end of the day, how Scott Bessent going to kind of balance market forces as well as kind of Trump's kind of desire for tariffs, the basis desire for tariffs, I think that still remains to be seen.
Well, Roz, Justina hits on that key point that there may be a little bit of pushback when it comes to this. And we saw this with Steven Mnuchin as well, of course, in the first Trump administration, where there was that pushback, where not everyone was on board of this kind of America first tariff policy because of the ripple effects and the consequences in the broader economy. Does Scott Bessent evade that risk?
Well, that risk has got to be there. As Justina was saying, Trump knows what he wants and he demands loyalty above all. And we saw he was not, above criticizing his own officials or even moving them out in his first administration if they disagreed with him. The question is, how much wiggle room do you have to disagree or rather to sort of manage the situation? So, yes, I'm going to enact tariffs, but we can do this in a step-by-step fashion, and here's why. So it's all going to be about that personal relationship and how Bessent navigates that with Donald Trump. We know, for example, Donald Trump famously tends to listen to the last person in the room and the last thing that's said in the room. So the last thing you say when you're leaving is, we can do tariffs, but let's do them a bit slower maybe for these reasons. And obviously, the counterpoint too is you've got Elon Musk in the conversation. And Elon Musk has got a lot at stake in China, for example. And so if you have Elon Musk also saying to Donald Trump, we need to do this with China and be a bit careful, you add that in. So maybe you do have some leeway there. But let's see how he goes.
You mentioned Elon Musk, the bromance that won't stop giving. He really backed Howard Lutnick as a potential Treasury Secretary instead of Scott Bessent. Howard Lutnick, the former Cantor Fitzgerald CEO, or is Cantor Fitzgerald CEO, has an ongoing relationship. The company has an ongoing relationship with Tether Holdings. That's something he could bring to the White House as Commerce Secretary. What do you make of that?
Well, it's very interesting, right? I mean, if there's one Trump trade that's absolutely genuine and sort of seems to be in one direction, that's cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, because Donald Trump has endorsed these things. In fact, his family members have marketed them. So obviously, the relationship there with Tether potentially that might come from this, it legitimizes cryptocurrencies even further. This would be allowing people to use Bitcoin or crypto as collateral for loans. So you're putting it in the realm of other assets that you could deem to be, acceptable to be collateral. So that's further bringing cryptocurrencies into the realm of legitimate assets for everybody else. And that's something that Donald Trump is very much doing. So seeing that with Lutnick and maybe the relationship that builds there with Tether, very interesting to watch.
Well, Justina, you, I'm sure, are watching this on the edge of your seat, every single move in crypto as well. I know you've certainly broken news on the crypto space. I'm confused about this crypto trade because on the one hand, you have this idea that they're acting about rhetoric that you've seen on the campaign trail, as Roz has mentioned. But then on the other hand, nothing actionable has actually happened in the government yet, or even is looking like it's going to be. It's also coming at the same time as a dollar rally, which fundamentally are two very different stories, a dollar strength and a decentralized currency, Bitcoin strength. How do you square the two?
Yeah, I think some of it is just like speculative fervor, as Ross was saying. If you think about how kind of Doge was rallying off the back of, the Department of Government Efficiency, it feels like we're living in a comedy here. But I think another part is people in the crypto community are really excited about the prospects of kind of less regulation around that space, especially knowing that, SEC Chair Gary Gensler has said that he's going to step down. Of course, he was public enemy number one for the crypto world. And it seems like, we're going to get an SEC chair that's going to be friendlier to this community. And at any rate, it doesn't seem like it could have been worse than kind of how kind of the Biden administration seen crypto. And I think it's part of it is just that generally there's gambling spirits are back in markets, but part of it is kind of very high hopes that the SEC is going to be friendlier toward crypto.
It almost kind of feeds into this political narrative of being a little bit more populist, a little bit more kind of man of the people, which is almost baked into a financial narrative. You don't always see that outside of kind of meme stop trading, for example. Justina Lee, Rosalind Masson, we will leave the conversation there. We thank you so much. Giving us insight on what is the Trump trade, how does it show up in the crypto space as well, certainly moving assets to the upside this morning. Coming up, not all assets are moving to the upside. In Europe, Unicredit has made an all-share bid for Banco BPM, potentially accelerating M&A activity in the European banking space at a very interesting time. We're going to dive into the details next. This is Bloomberg.
Well, President Trump being elected certainly gave a boost and gave greater clarity to this. But I will say that 2024 has been a landmark year, and that momentum started earlier this year. So if you look at what happened in January this year with Bitcoin ETF being approved, firstly in the United States and then subsequently all around the world, from Brazil to Canada to Australia, Hong Kong, and the list goes on. It gives a lot of recognition and finally the respect that this sector deserved all along.
Binance CEO Richard Tang speaking with our very own Francine Lacqua there about the state of crypto. And we should get a quick check on that as well. When we're looking at Bitcoin pricing here, right on the cusp of 100,000, 98,700 is what we'll call it, higher by about 1.7%. Remember, the standard deviation for crypto is usually about 4 to 5%. So this is actually very light trading to the upside, but nevertheless just shy of that 100,000 mark. We should also mention us in terms of big market moves this morning, and the European session seeing quite a bit of volatility when it comes to the Italian banking sector. You are seeing Unicredit down a whopping almost 4%, we'll call it. Banco BPM higher by 3.2%, and more M&A in the works, more banking consolidation in Italy, and that's going to be a trade that we continue to see as, of course, Unicredit has launched a 10 billion euro all-share offer for its domestic rival, Banco BPM, opening a second major takeover front as CEO Andrea Orcel also pursues Commerce Bank. Really fascinating time at the moment. Let's bring in a true expert. Tommaso Ebhardt, our Southern Europe managing editor, joins us this morning. Tommaso, walk us through what this move is by Orcel, because I'm having personally a little bit of deja vu with the BBVA takeover of Sabadell. This idea that you have so much international exposure, you need to go to domestic consolidation to kind of make sure you're still catering to that local market. Is that the right read?
That's a good point. That's really a good point. For sure, somehow it seems today that Andrea Orcel is moving back his attention from Germany to Italy. He made clearly a bold move and an unsolicited bid for Banco BPM. This was not expected now in terms of timing, but Banco BPM has been a target for Unicredit for a while. While it's Italy's third largest bank, it's the bank of the wealthy Milan region, and Unicredit clearly lacks presence in Italy comparing with its rival Intesa Sanpaolo. So it makes for sure sense for Orcel to do the move, but is doing this after getting a stake in Commerzbank and weighing a bid for Commerzbank. So the read that investors are giving to this, essentially this morning, is that somehow Orcel is turning back his attention to his home country, and maybe that's the reason why we see Commerzbank going down and Banco BPM going up. The bank would be the biggest bank in Italy. The big question here is how the Italian government reads this, and if the move on Banco BPM would delay any action on Commerzbank. Orcel spoke to investors this morning. He said, for now, Commerzbank is just a financial investment.
So, Tommaso, where does Monte Paschi fall into all this, given that Maloney has been trying to offload that stake as well, privatize, I think, one of the oldest banks in the world, Monte Paschi.
Yeah.
Banco BPM also has a stake in Monte Paschi. Orcel says he doesn't want it. What happens to Monte Paschi?
That's another good question. I don't have any real answer, but we can talk about it. So essentially, Monte Paschi, is the world's oldest bank. few days ago, the Italian government managed to sell part of its remaining stake, and one of the buyers was Banco BPM, who a few days before already made a bold move. They made a bid for asset manager Anima. So what's happening here? For sure, Unicredit is going after Banco BPM, while Banco BPM was somehow being part of an Italian group of investors which was buying Monte dei Paschi di Siena. So how those two things go together, we'll have to see. For so far, we didn't have any reaction from the Italian government. For sure, Orcel decided to move before Banco BPM and Monte dei Paschi have closer ties. That's what we can say for sure at the moment.
It's a fascinating one. We'll see how this all shakes out. And Tommaso, we didn't even get to Commerzbank, a conversation for another time. Bloomberg Southern Europe managing editor Tommaso Ebhardt trying to break down the Italian banking sector as best he can. We thank you so much. But of course, as we talk about Italy, Commerzbank is very much in focus. That stake down as well. You are seeing those stocks trading higher. We're going to stick with the Germany story. Coming up on the program, we're going to speak to the IFO Institute president on the latest survey on business confidence and competitiveness in Germany. Those numbers coming in a bit weaker than expected. That conversation next. This is Bloomberg. Just when we thought there might have been a pivot point in the Germany economy, we are instead seeing the exact opposite. Germany's November IFO Business Confidence Index coming in at 85.7. The estimate was 86.0. Remember last month we saw a little bit of a tick higher. Today we are seeing the opposite. Let's get some more insight here. Clemens Fuest, president of Germany's IFO Institute, joins me live this morning. Clemens, a pleasure to have you on the program. I'm going to get right into it here. It looks like there's a lot going on around both the United States and the German government that's feeding into the sentiment. Walk us through just how much worse it could get if President-elect Donald Trump does indeed input more tariffs on Europe. What does that look like for you?
Well, that's obviously one major concern, and that has been a concern in German manufacturing in particular for some time now, and it's part of the explanation why this sector is having such a difficult time. In the data we see today, this is confirmed to some extent, so the readings from manufacturing are weak, although we haven't really observed a big difference between readings that came in before and after the U.S. election. So it looks like many companies maybe expected Donald Trump to win. So there is no big change here. This month, the only bright spot really comes from consumption. So retail and wholesale has improved. The readings from retail and wholesale have improved, reflecting that the growing disposable incomes, which we do have, seem to be translating into higher consumption demand. But manufacturing, construction, and this time also services are weak.
Clemens, there are two other factors that I want to dive into, the banking consolidation story, and then, of course, this idea of consumption and taxation as well. I'll start with the latter. There is a conversation right now, as you're familiar with, that in a new administration in Germany, the question of the corporate tax rate may actually get cut. Is that enough to spur consumption and investment, Clemens?
That would be one point that is important. Taxes are high in Germany and creating incentives would help, but it's certainly not enough. What we need is a more comprehensive agenda that would include over-regulation of the economy. It would have include the supply of energy. It would have to cover other areas in the economy, in particular labor supply. A lot of companies are concerned that they will simply not find the workforce. And that's why they don't invest in Germany. So what we need is a comprehensive growth strategy. Corporate tax rate cut alone will not be enough.
All right, Clemens, I'm going to put you on the spot here for time. We're talking a lot about banking consolidation this morning, yes, in terms of Italy, but of course, Commerzbank is coming on as a part of the conversation. I am familiar that you're not, of course, someone that speaks to the banking sector, but you mentioned this idea of consumption. Germany is known as being an overbanked space. Could further consolidation help spur the German economy further?
The consolidation of the banking sector, I think, is a Europe-wide issue. It certainly applies to Germany. At the same time, there are concerns about the style of the takeover, and there are concerns about the fact that the takeover would create a large European bank. And if that bank hits a crisis, it's not clear how this would be managed. It would be a bank that has most of its assets in Germany, but its headquarters in Italy, so who would be responsible? There are many open questions. I think for the development of the German economy, certainly some banking consolidation would be helpful. And for the development of European capital markets and European banking union, cross-border mergers should be allowed. And in general, I suppose Germany is open for that. As I said, there are some specific issues in this case.
Clemens, I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have, but we thank you so much for joining me this morning. Clemens Fuest, president of the IFO Institute, walking us through not only the impact of that consolidation story, but also the tariff story and how that is all feeding into German sentiment. He says consumption and taxation are two key pieces. We're going to, of course, monitor that. Coming up on the program, the Rolls-Royce CEO sat down with our very own Francine Lacqua in an exclusive conversation. We're going to bring you that next right here on The Pulse. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. Good morning and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. These are your top stories. Stocks and treasuries rally after President-elect Donald Trump picks Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary. Bessent says he'll back tariffs and tax cuts. In Europe, Unicredit begins an all-share takeover bid for its domestic rival, Banco BPM, as the Italian lender also considers an acquisition of Germany's Commerzbank. And sticking with Germany, Germany's business outlook slides in November due to the government's collapse and the threat of tariffs following Donald Trump's re-election as U.S. president. Both certainly a topic of mind over at the G7, where foreign ministers are meeting just outside Rome, with the wars in both Ukraine and the Middle East also at a crucial stage. Let's get more of Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. Ollie, walk us through the agenda in Rome.
Yeah, Kriti, so this is the foreign ministers of the G7 convening just outside of Rome here. This is the last G7 foreign minister meeting that will occur under the Biden administration. So really critical for Antony Blinken to get many of his sort of points across and to make any sort of enduring legacy in the last few months of the Biden administration. What we expect on day one is really a focus on the Middle East, on the situation in Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon. They're going to also be joined by the ministers of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and Qatar, as well as the Secretary General for the Arab League. They're working on these ceasefire talks. We have had many conversations and many false dawns. We heard from the the Israeli ambassador to the United States a little bit earlier today, saying that potentially there could be a ceasefire discussion with Hezbollah in the coming days. Again, many false dawns there, but this from the Israeli ambassador to the United States a little bit earlier today. We expect also sort of more plans on the day after for Gaza. And of course, there's the issue of that International Criminal Court arrest warrant for for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, both of which should sort of divide opinion of many of the people that are attending that meeting. We should say that this is all ahead of the Trump administration, really the Biden trying to get this sort of agenda through. Trump has said he will bring sort of peace to the Middle East, not really designated how exactly he intends to do that, though he's expected overall to take a much more pro-Israel approach.
Ollie, talk to us about the other war in this region. That, of course, is Ukraine. The approach that Donald Trump is taking when it comes to those potential ceasefire negotiations, how's that being interpreted in Rome?
Well, listen, I think that it's very sort of early days, and I think everybody is very conscious of the fact that the second that Trump comes into the Oval Office, that the paradigm in Ukraine could shift very quickly. We should say that the Ukrainian foreign minister will join the G7 for talks tomorrow in Rome. There is also a NATO-Ukraine meeting happening in Brussels tomorrow, in addition to the fact that you have the defense ministers of France, of Poland, of Italy, all meeting in Berlin today to sort of discuss what the future looks like. And we've seen the Biden administration really try to front-load as much help as they can get to Ukraine in the final months, whether it's those long-range missiles, giving the permission to strike within Russia, whether it's landmines, whether it's sort of forgiving debt. Also talking about sort of a sanctioning Gazprom bank, the last bank that is still accepting payments for natural gas that is flowing over to Europe. But there is a real consciousness that there is only so much that can be done. And for many, they're just seeing this as sort of trying to put Zelensky in the strongest position for those negotiations going in with Donald Trump. I think, Kriti, as far as the Europeans are concerned, what they keep saying is that there should be no decision made about Ukraine without Ukraine at the table. I think what the Europeans need to face is the possibility that there are decisions that are going to be made potentially about Ukraine without the Europeans at the table between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
And who is ultimately going to be that potential voice now that Olaf Scholz may or may not be in power in Germany in just the next year? Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, we thank you so much for, of course, breaking that down for us. And as Ollie was saying, there's some major conversations happening at the G7 that does also include the impacts on things like supply chains and nuclear capability. The CEO of Rolls-Royce said that he's optimistic about the growth trajectory of the British company and spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua on those very topics. Take a listen.
What we were trying to do, Francine, is really create a company which is actually competitive, resilient, growing, and high-performing company. And frankly, Rolls-Royce has never been any of that. So that was actually our vision. So if you actually come to our progress, I would say we really, in a very difficult supply chain environment, we made a great progress in spite of that. And we expanded earnings and cash potential of the business significantly. And it didn't come from one division. It came from all divisions. So step change in all divisions. In fact, in the first year, our results were best on record. Now, this year we said, we obviously first half results, we upgraded our guidance for the year. When we deliver this year's results, we are gonna, when we set the midterm targets, I call it strategic goals, but midterm targets, people thought they were really ambitious. Now, in 2 years, when we deliver this year's results, we are gonna achieve on profit more than 75% of the performance improvement, and on cash, more than 65%. So we are actually accelerating the transformation of the business.
What do you think the Trump administration means for your industry, be it transport, commercial, or defense?
I mean, reality is, I think if we start with defense, given you talk about geopolitics in the world, and defense, obviously spending has been going up in the world already. If you look at actually some of the highest sort of defense spending in the world. So relative to the history. So that trend may continue. But one thing I'm going to say, I already said we are not a weapon company. Sometimes people confuse, are you benefiting from this? Actually, our defense sort of segment doesn't benefit from that because we are a propulsion company. Our growth is enormous, regardless of current geopolitics, because of the wins I talk about, right?
But there seems to be a new phase in Ukraine, right, in the war, and that also implicates, I guess, possible extra sanctions on Russia. I mean, Russia is one of the biggest titanium producers, which you need to almost build everything. I mean, is that even are there going to be more bottlenecks with titanium?
There are already bottlenecks. Some of the supply chain issues, raw materials, actually includes titanium. But we have been actually transitioning to alternative source already. And that's what we have been doing last couple of years.
Tufan, you have been in the job for about almost 2 years, yes. Right? We're just shy of 2 years anniversary. There's a new chief executive of Boeing. Boeing has had a very difficult time in the last couple of years. Have you met with him? Did you share any advice as he starts this new job and this new hurdle?
Definitely I met him because Boeing is a very important customer, but also very important industry player. So we had a good conversation about Rolls-Royce experience as well, of course. I don't want to go into the details, but my wish is, I hope they are going to recover very quickly, although there are some challenges, because really aerospace industry needs strong Boeing. I really mean it, by the way. So I think hopefully after now that strike is over, they can actually move to the recovery, and I hope it is a fast recovery.
How quickly do you think they'll move? And did you share, I mean, do you have any advice for Boeing right now?
I mean, we obviously had private conversation, but these things takes, some people are saying this year Boeing will recover. These things take a couple of years at least. So, because you need to look at the culture, you need to look at how the company is run. I mean, we change everything on Rolls-Royce. I always say, people always look at what. They will never understand what we are doing and how we are delivering results until they understand how. Because how includes everything. The culture, it is how you run the company, how you run the performance management, lots of things. So therefore, frankly, they will do some of that, I'm sure.
Rolls-Royce is a UK-listed company. We have a new set of rules in terms of listings. We have a new government. I mean, have they, you know, what would you ask of the government right now? Have they been helpful enough? Is there regulation that needs to change? Energy policy? What would you do differently?
I mean, I think they came up with 8 sectors under industrial strategy. It is good. But I would say, sort of, I've seen lots of, even if they are developed like good strategies, lots of companies struggle to implement their strategy. I think the issue will be on the implementation, really. Can you actually cut the red tape? Can you accelerate the things? And some of the things, frankly, we are still experiencing needs accelerating, like SMR process, for example. It has been delayed. There is no excuse for that to be delayed. It needs to be accelerated. And underneath that, my wish is they focus on competitively advantaged industries. Why am I saying that? Because if you support competitively advantaged industry, that's a sustainable growth machine for you in terms of exports. For example, we have 2 areas we are actually competitively advantaged. UK is competitively advantaged. One is gas turbines. So I'll tell you, there are only 2 countries in the world and 3 companies in the world can do what we do. And we are one of them, by the way.
The government understands?
That's the point. Under industrial strategy, I would argue aerospace and nuclear needs to be subsectors. And nuclear, I told you, we have, and UK has, unique capability. There is no single private company in the world with that capability. We can be and should be in SMRs, like small modular reactors, market leaders in the world, right? Because you have the capability, we can actually move first mover advantage, create supply chain in the country. But for that to happen, GBM process needs to accelerate significantly. Current timeline doesn't work at all.
The CEO of Rolls-Royce there speaking to our very own Francine Lacqua. I want to bring you some breaking news that's crossing the Bloomberg terminal at the moment. It looks like Adani Green shares have dropped 10% as TotalEnergies continues to suspend its investments. This, of course, comes on the back of the allegations for corruption and the probe on bribing out of the United States government. You are starting to see a lot of steamrolling around companies that were initially associated with that green climate agenda pulling out. Total seems to be the latest in that trend. Coming up on the program, we are on the hunt for acquisitions. We're going to speak to the CEO of Swiss industrial giant ABB. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. Swiss industrial giant ABB says looking to step up the pace of acquisitions. Now, the company recently raised its margin outlook on booming demand for data centers and its power unit, but the firm's robotics and factory automation continue to suffer in the third quarter. Lucky for us to break it all down, we've got the CEO of ABB joining me right here, Morten Wierod, joining me around the table. Thank you. Welcome and to the set. You've said some pretty interesting things around acquisitions just this morning. Walk us through what you're looking for. What are you shopping for?
We want to expand ABB, and we were doing really well after the last 5 years, but now moving from a profitability focus to a growth focus. And there, of course, organic growth, but also acquisitions. And we're looking for businesses that can help our core of ABB accelerate. So it's more of those nice add-ons and bolt-on acquisitions. It's often, we promised about 1 to 2% of revenue, which give you about $300 to $600 million of additional revenue every year. And it should kind of strengthen the core of ABB, that being in the field of electrification or automation. So we haven't kind of singled out anything. We are running our company with 18 operating divisions, and each one of them who has what we call a growth mandate. That means they are already running as leaders in the area and the segments that they serve. We expect them to do acquisitions, and that's the pipeline that each of these divisions are building now and have done this year. I was happy already in the third quarter. We saw 2 nice acquisitions, to give you examples of a SEAM company in U.S., which is in the electrification service business. It's about $100 million company that is giving us more than 300 service engineers on the ground, helping the U.S. customers running their operations even better with better automation and electrification offerings. So this is one example that we're doing. And another one was we bought the Fuest group in Germany, which is in the field of measurement and analytics. A nice niche again, where we can build on our strength as ABB in the field of measurement and analytics, bringing the Fuest group together. We will be more relevant and more interesting for our customers in that field. And that's what we want to do more of in the coming years.
So you said 2 key buzzwords there, automation and electrification. It feels like the easiest acquisitions to do from a big tech perspective, not that you're big tech, but roll with me on this one, is to just hop onto things like data centers, onto AI technology. Is that where the lucrative deals are in terms of value add, the quick bolt-on acquisitions that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, AI and just the buildup of data center is driving one of the driving forces of ABB at the moment in our electrification business. So the more, of course, the more scope you can have in that space, the better. But we're always looking for a balance where we can do organic also investment. And here is about the technology. How can we expand what we do today and help these companies in the data center space, the big tech companies? How can we help them to reduce their cost of investment? Because they're building these massive data centers. Now we're talking about the 100 of megawatts of data center, which is kind of small, the electrical consumption of small towns today. So how can we help them to reduce those investment, but also to do it faster? All that brings more scope into ABB, so we can help these data center customers speed up their building and reduce their building time. That is normally one of the key things we're looking for.
So faster, more efficient, but doesn't that equal more expensive as well? I mean, some of these things you're talking about are dynamics, I feel like, that exist in this energy transition space as well. And that's where part of the AI demand comes from, the data center demand comes from. But isn't that a very expensive prospect given electricity and power and building out that infrastructure, especially here in Europe, is pricey?
Yeah, it is. And that's why you need better technology. You know, that's why I'm so happy to be in a company. We have thousands and thousands of smart engineers who gets up in the morning and look at how can we do this better? How can we do it cheaper? How can we make, for instance, today we use uninterruptible power supplies in the data center, which is what we call in the clean space, in the white space. How can we build that outside where it would be cheaper and would be easier to do? What we today talk about medium voltage UPS, which is on a higher level, and it's on the outside, which is again reducing the cost of build and also reduces the energy consumption over the lifetime. Because with these new massive data center that comes up now around the world, but also here in Europe, the cost of energy will become such an important part, but also to reduce, and energy efficiency of data center is important, or else we need energy for more than just running data centers around the world.
But the dynamics around incentivizing some of that and leaning into it have changed. And I'm specifically pointing out to the election of Donald Trump as well, where some of those subsidizations under the Biden administration are largely expected to be pulled back, maybe not even helped to the same extent. You have the likes of Adani Green, for example, those shares tumbling this morning as a function of some of the concerns around being associated there, something that a lot of people had done to get ahead of not only the AI story, but the environment transition, kind of green energy story as well. How do you navigate that environment where it's getting tough politically and even in the corporate space as well?
I always believe that sustainability topics and need to go hand in hand with also the business plan. It needs to be a business case for energy efficiency, for the investments that businesses are doing. So what I look at what's happening in the U.S., these investments that's happening now, like the utility companies doing, they do that in renewable, like in solar in Florida, because it has the lowest cost of energy. And therefore, kind of business and also the climate targets goes hand in hand. And that's where things are happening. I do believe that you will see reduction in some areas based on kind of post-Trump election. But you will see a lot of these investments plan that sits, for instance, when it comes to power grid investments in the U.S., it's not based on federal funding. It's made state law, like in California. So with more extreme weather, as we face, and especially in North America or all across the world, unfortunately, these days, investment in more secure power generation, more secure power distribution is needed. So I don't see a big change, really, from that point of view, at least not for our business.
Well, certainly one we're going to keep an eye on. A final question to you, then. Talk to me a little bit about the investment in Northvolt. We're talking about this question of energy transition, about leaning into that. So many people did that for Northvolt, and so many people got burned. Walk us through your Northvolt stake. Are you looking for acquisitions similar to that now that we've seen that company file for bankruptcy in the United States?
We are still an owner in Northvolt ABB, but we are a small owner, and we are there really as a technical advisor to help them get going to build on the electrification automation side. It's been a tough ride for the company to get their production up and running. So that is, I think it's a bit, I have to say, it's a bit sad to see that one of the first big investments in Europe when it comes to a new energy source, like batteries, that it fails or what has happened. But I think that's always a lesson learned. We shouldn't give up as Europeans, just say, okay, this is all going to be done in the United States or in China in the future. I think there are, I'm sure, on the aftermath of this, it's lessons to be learned. And we need to see out, because I believe that Europe also have to step up in many of these new areas investment, that be in the decarbonization of industries, that be in the green steel, the green aluminium, the green cement. This is areas that over time we need to perform, also on the European continent. So I hope we take what we have seen at Northvolt to do really a post assessment, and then we need to step up as a continent as well.
Well, certainly something we're going to keep an eye on. It doesn't sound like you're taking a step back from the grain transition as well. Morten Wierod, ABB CEO there, joining me around the table. More to come. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. A lot going on in the European banking sector. Of course, we have the story that Unicredit is looking to explore a Banco BPM bid, of course, on top of Commerzbank as well. Monte Paschi, not so much. Lots going on. This is Bloomberg.